Good afternoon, Senators. Today is the 8th of December 2022 afternoon session of the Senate, and going down the order of business for the second reading. The Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Halkitis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to move for second reading and committal the bill. The short title is the Disaster Risk Management Bill, Madam President, but at this time, I would just like to advise that there were certain movements to the bill in that other place, and so I would just seek permission of the Senate to withdraw the bill that had previously been laid and to lay the bill with the movements that were done in that other place at this time, if we can get consent, Madam President.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield. Darren Henfield, Senator Darren Henfield, do we have your consent?
We are agreed.
Thank you, Senator Henfield. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Senator Henfield.
Yes.
And so, Madam President, I rise to move for second reading and committal for Bill for an Act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters. And the short title of the bill is the Disaster Risk Management Bill, Madam President, and at the one provision of this bill towards the end is the repeal of the Disaster Preparedness and Response, let me make sure I have the title right, the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act. So the intention in the passage of this bill is to repeal the Disaster Preparedness and Response Act as well as the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act. But I would say, Madam President, that included in this bill are certain provisions that were saved from those acts, and I will go through some of those as I move in further into my presentation. But if I might quote the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, who has responsibility for disaster management, Madam President, and he said in his speaking in that other place, acknowledging that the current governance arrangements in the Bahamas are not optimal for the effective implementation of the disaster risk management policy, this government authorized the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs to collaborate with the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, the DRA, to draft legislation aimed at developing, promoting, and implementing an approach to disaster risk management that is holistic, comprehensive, integrated, and proactive in lessening the socioeconomic and environmental impact of disasters, including climate change. Following this decision by the government, a request was made to the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, to provide technical support to draft the said legislation. Subsequently, the Ministry of Finance requested a policy-based loan series to support this legal reform. And so, as a part of the governance framework, the new Act will establish a new entity, the Disaster Risk Management Authority, to coordinate the policy implementation and responsibilities of other stakeholders like public bodies, and I would add including local government, and as well it has in here guidelines for the involvement of the international community in disaster recovery. And so what this is seeking to do, Madam President, is to implement a framework whereby, a holistic framework, whereby government from the executive level to the local government level, to the level of public bodies, that is public corporations and other entities controlled by the government, members of the general public might have input into the formulation of a disaster risk management policy and as well the implementation of that policy, and as well particularly as it relates to disaster preparedness and disaster response to disaster. And so, as stated in the Act and as said by the Minister, Madam President, the purpose of this act, the objectives of this act, is to develop, promote, and implement an approach to disaster risk management that is holistic, comprehensive, integrated, and proactive in lessening the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of disasters, including climate change, and to focus on reducing risk, including the risk of the loss of life, health, physical integrity, economic disruption, damage to the environment and property, especially to those members of the population who are most vulnerable by reason of age, disability, poverty, lack of resources, physical displacement, or gender. And so, Madam President, the Act calls for the establishment of a national disaster risk management policy. And the policy shall be based on certain principles, and the guiding principles of the policy should be the supremacy of life, security, and health of a person, his property and livelihood, and the environment, and the responsibility of the government to assume the financial responsibility for the analysis of risk, disaster risk reduction, financial protection, etc. So the bill calls for the development of a policy, and certain principles should guide the policy, the first of which, the supremacy of life. We spoke about the responsibility of the government to assume financial responsibility for risk analysis. The duty of the relevant authority, principally when we talk about local government, to take the disaster risk consideration in the formulation, approval, implementation, and monitoring of public investment projects. So talking about the public works. And it goes on to speak about special needs of certain groups, consideration of any political, historical, and socioeconomic consideration unique to the Bahamas. That's an interesting provision, Madam President. So you should have a policy, and it should be guided by those basic principles. Another key element is that the entity, any entity, including public bodies and central government, local government, it is the one core principle of the policy is a duty to make information about disasters, hazards, disaster alerts, etc., accessible to the public. And so those things undergird the policy, and there are certain elements that go into the policy. In the bill, they're referred to as instruments of disaster risk management policy. There must be a disaster risk management plan. There must be an emergency plan, plans in place by public bodies. So there's an overall plan. There's a national disaster emergency plan, a plan by public bodies, local plans that take into account the characteristics of our local communities, plans to include what they call a baseline of disaster risk, above which the government is responsible, a comprehensive financing strategy for disaster risk management. It calls for a National Disaster Emergency Operations Center, which shall function as a headquarters for activities undertaken in response to the disaster. It calls for the development of coordination protocols, national information system, a network of forecasting systems, an early warning system, disaster emergency fund, disaster prevention fund, national humanitarian assistance standards. So all of those things are instruments of the national policy. There is, when we speak about, I spoke earlier about the fact that there is a role for everybody in the management of disaster risk. There is a committee called the Interministerial Committee on Disaster Risk Management, which is a subcommittee of cabinet. And the bill gives guidelines as to who should be, which members should be on that committee. And it looks as if it's the entire cabinet, Madam President, but it says the Prime Minister, who shall be the chairman. The minister is responsible for disaster risk management, finance, national development planning, tourism, housing, transport, public works, health, agriculture, environment, foreign affairs, public utilities, social welfare, communications, national security, and any other ministry which is required, and any other person, any other minister that might be deemed by the Prime Minister as a member of the committee. So this Inter-Ministerial Committee on Disaster Risk Management, their function is to advise and make recommendations to the Minister on the development of the policy and any other issue related to disaster risk management, and very importantly, report to the Parliament on the implementation of the policy and the finances and the financial strategy for disaster risk management. So you have at the very highest level, a committee made up of a subcommittee of cabinet their responsibility is to advise the minister, report to cabinet. They have certain other functions laid out in the bill, including they must periodically conduct a review. Well, annually, they must conduct a review of the policy to determine its adequacy and any changes that needs to be made to the policy. The bill also outlines the functions of the Prime Minister, chief of which is, in certain circumstances, to declare disaster alert, to declare disaster emergency, to activate disaster emergency measures, and to perform any other function, of course, related to disaster management. And it also empowers that interministerial committee to co-opt persons, to bring in persons to have input into their deliberations and formulation of policy. It's quite interesting. The Act says no co-opted person shall have the right to vote at any meeting of the committee. So, you know, that sounds like taxation without representation, but anyhow. So you have at a very high level a interministerial committee whose responsibility it is to advise the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has a role under the Act. Again, Madam President, seeking to bring some structure and cohesiveness to this whole operation of disaster risk management. The bill goes on to establish the Disaster Risk Management Authority. It establishes it. It establishes a board, and the board has a particular constitution. It shall include the managing director of the Disaster Risk Authority, the chairman and deputy chairman, representative of the ministry responsible for disaster risk management, appointed by the minister, representative of the Ministry of Finance, appointed by the Minister of Finance, the head of the National Disaster Emergency Operations Center, and not more than 7 or less than 3 other persons representing financial, industrial, commercial, or other institutions or professional organizations. And it says the chairman shall not hold any political office. And it requires for those additional 7 or maximum 7, minimum 3 persons who are appointed, other than the ex officio members, it requires that they should have some experience in the areas of engineering, environmental management, public health, water resource management, finance. And so, Madam President, on the board, a diverse group of individuals representing key ministries and as well public and private sector with expertise in particular areas, who would bring their skill and experience to the deliberation of the board of the Disaster Risk Management Authority. And talks about the staff, you know, and the functions. I'll just outline a few of the functions of the Disaster Risk Authority: to advise the Prime Minister, chief among them, to advise the Prime Minister when it is necessary to declare the disaster alert, advise the Cabinet and the Interministerial Committee on any issue related to disaster risk, to validate an area designated by the competent authority as an area prone to disasters. So to serve as a second pair of eyes, so to speak, which requires the implementation of land use restrictions or action to facilitate disaster risk reduction. And so if the competent authority declares an area prone to disaster, the authority has the function of validating that decision. So a second opinion, so to speak. The authority should also advise the Ministry of Finance on a formulation of the benchmark risks, and prepare and submit to that interministerial committee a report on the implementation of the disaster risk management plan, disaster emergency plan, and any other plan or strategic development. So again, you see the board composed of individuals from key ministries and the others from the public and private sector having input into the strategy by the requirement that they report to the inter-ministerial committee, who then reports to the full cabinet. Madam President, the bill also outlines the functions of local government in disaster risk management. These functions largely performed by the administrator, and the functions of public bodies, that is, public corporations or other entities controlled or owned by the government. They are all required to have disaster risk management plans and disaster risk management, disaster emergency plans in place. When we go to the Part 9 of the bill speaks about disaster alert and disaster emergency. And the Prime Minister is the one who is empowered to declare that a disaster emergency exists. And he does that upon advice from the authority. And he will declare an order, he would issue an order declaring that a disaster emergency. That order shall include a designation of the zone, and that whole designation should be based on an assessment conducted by the authority. So we see through and through, Madam President, all of decisions subject to advice of the authority, who reports up through the committee and in some cases directly to the Prime Minister. But the board consists of people from diverse backgrounds who will have that sort of expertise to be able to give good advice. Finally, what I want to say about the bill, no, not finally, in terms of disaster response, rehabilitation, and recovery, the functions shall be performed, particularly in the localities, by the administrator, and that's outlined in the bill. And funds, there shall be two funds: the disaster emergency fund and the disaster prevention fund, which shall be kept separate and which shall be subject to audit, and those reports made public. And then it goes on to speak about, we spoke about the cabinet, the role of the Prime Minister, the role of the inter-ministerial committee, the role of local government and public bodies. There's also a room here for public participation in disaster risk management through a non-governmental consultation council, which the authority shall appoint, and shall consist of persons who possess qualifications, skills, or experience in the management of disaster risk, community-based organizations, non-profit organizations, corporations, and other private organizations who specialize in the management of disaster risk. So it sets out how members of the general public can participate, and it also goes on to set out how international aid is accepted and the channels that individuals have to go through so that we are in the position to accept international aid. And there's a requirement that, of course, the authority should publish those what aid is being requested and what aid has been given, and it speaks to things like travel clearance and empowering individuals, local individuals, to be liaison between local and international bodies. Madam President, there are certain miscellaneous provisions to deal with building permits and declaration of relief and publishing of an order, etc., how long the orders should last. But I think the main point is that what is happening is we're seeking to have a holistic approach, a streamlined and coordinated approach where the role of every person, every body is laid out, and it gives an opportunity for involvement straight down to the local level and to the international level. There are certain, as I said, Madam President, this bill will repeal the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act and the Disaster Preparation and Response Act. But there are certain provisions that survive in this bill. For example, defining the government's responsibility in the post-disaster recovery process, the requirement for regulations, the formulation of emergency and contingency plans at the national level, the existence of a national risk management regulations, establishing the responsibility to inform citizens, that remains in the bill. So essentially an amalgamation of those two acts that are being repealed, but with just making it more comprehensive, holistic and plain as to the responsibility of the various actors. Again, done after consultation with the IDB and, of course, the OAG. Madam President, and so that is the intention. We just put in place a management framework that allows everybody to have some participation. Madam President, before I sit, when we speak about talking about disaster risk management, fresh in everybody's mind is Dorian and the devastation, loss of life, the destruction of property, etc., the struggle from which many people still continue to try to emerge from, and very devastating. And lately, Madam President, there has been some discussion about the Special Economic Recovery Zone, the SERS relief orders that came to an end on December 1st of this year, Madam President. And there has been a lot of debate about it, and I think I'll just take a few minutes to explain to the public what is going on and the way forward. In the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, Madam President, there was something, the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act of 2019 was passed. And under that act, certain orders were promulgated, the Special Economic Zone orders. And in the first instance, Madam President, the first order was done on the 4th of December, 2019. So there was I think my advice is the feeling was, let's have an act, and under that act, we can issue these orders. So the Disaster Reconstruction Authority Act of 2019, under which, and the government in seeking to bring relief to individuals who were impacted by Hurricane Dorian, issued the first Disaster Reconstruction Authority Special Economic Recovery Zone Order 2019 on the 4th of December 2019. And in that initial order, Madam President, that was to last from the 4th of December 2019 to the 30th of June 2020. And of course, in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane, it included duty exemptions on a wide array of products, including things like mosquito netting, solar panels, electrical fixtures and building materials, and other things like bedding, personal hygiene products, because we were in the immediate aftermath of the storm. It also included concessions, breaks on business license, real property tax, and VAT discounts on property purchases. That expired 30 to June 2020, and there was one that replaced that ran from the 1st of July. So when that one expired the 30th of June 2020, a subsequent one was issued that went from 1st of July 2020 to the 31st of December 2020. And again, with that, there's a wide array of goods, brakes on business license, VAT, discount on property sales to encourage economic activity, construction, etc. And on this one was added a VAT exemption on construction services. And so that was set to expire 31st December 2020. Another one was issued on the 31st December 2020. That was to go from January 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2021, so 6 months. In that one, the amount of goods that were subject to imported duty-free was reduced and restricted mostly to, well, just to building materials, household furniture, hardware supplies, building materials, electrical fixtures, plumbing fixtures. In that one, January 1st, 2021, that was to run January 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2021. Construction services was deleted. There were fewer goods. There remained a VAT concession, a sliding scale of discounts on property purchases. When that was about to expire, Madam President, there was another one issued 1st of July 2021 to 1st of December 2021. VAT-free construction services was added back. Again, there were fewer goods, mostly building materials this time. And mostly building materials. And so when that was set to expire 31st December 2021, Madam President, there was a new order issued 1st of January 2022 that would run from 1st of January to the 1st of December 2022, and that was the one that recently expired. Again, goods restricted mostly to household furniture and building materials, also a VAT-free exemption on a zero rating of VAT on construction services, which has expired. So, Madam President, I wanted to go through that because, you know, there's been some criticism of the government for allowing the order to expire. You were called heartless in allowing them to expire. But I just want to make just a couple of points and talk about the way forward, Madam President. If you notice, as I spoke about each one of those orders, the first 4 orders, their duration was 6 months. Not 1 year, not 2 years, not 5 years, not 10 years, not forever, not till everybody gets it. 6 months. The reason it's for 6 months, Madam President, because it gives the government an opportunity to look at it and make adjustments, add things, take away things. So we put it on for 6 months. So when I hear the criticism, well, why you let it expire? Well, Madam President, that's normally, you know, we do it here. Put legislation in, tax legislation in for a specific period. It gives you an opportunity to be able to go back and review. And so what happened is it was expanded and the list was changed. First it was, of course, we understand in the very immediate aftermath, everything, all goods basically, including food and personal hygiene products. And then as we go along, the list has been adjusted. I say that to say, Madam President, so for those who sat in the chair who are now saying, why let it expire, they themselves, Madam President, put it in for 6 months with a view to reviewing it. I know, the view to reviewing it so you can adjust it. We understand, and so the last thing, the one that we did, Madam President, was when we got down to the final one, which was set to expire December 31st, 2021, what we did is we extended it for a year. Not for 6 months, for a year. Just about a year, 11 months, January 1st to December 1st. Madam President, we understand and we are sympathetic to the fact that in Grand Bahama and in Abaco, the Keys, there are certain individuals who haven't, as we say, haven't caught themselves yet. You have a tradition in the Bahamas of billing out of your pocket. You know, you do a little piece, you do a little piece. And so we are sympathetic to that. And that is why we said we will allow for the overall exemptions to expire because, quite frankly, Madam President, you look at it, and you make a determination that in order for you to truly target those most in need who really need it, our advice is the best course of action is to let the blanket exemptions expire and allow those who are still in the process of rebuilding, who are packing, like we say in the Bahamas, to still be allowed to come in, put in an application, verified that their damages from Hurricane Dorian, and they are able to take advantage of the exemption, Madam President. I understand as well that there was an issue raised about when we said we'll deal with them on a case-by-case basis. The question was raised, well, you know, we don't want any politics to enter into it. We want everybody to feel that they have a fair shake, Madam President, and I want to assure the public that no politics will enter into it, and we are prepared. Right now, the forms are available at the Ministry of Grand Bahama in Freeport, as well as we instructed them to be available at the High Rock Administrator's Office in East Grand Bahama and the Office of the Prime Minister in Marsh Harbor, Abaco. Well, they should be there. All right, they should be there from this morning. They should have been there yesterday. And what we're saying, Madam President, is we'll, you know, if anybody feels that they might be, if for any reason, uncomfortable or feel that we can assure them that everything will be considered on a you know, without any consideration other than the consideration of need, but we are prepared to have them, you know, drop off, you know, customs, the administrator's office, whatever. But our view, Madam President, you know, cannot seek to put a price on the suffering and the pain that was caused, but we begin now to get back to a sense of normalcy, so that, again, our objective is those who are in most need, they are not left behind, because we find that when you have the blanket exemption, some people who don't need it, who don't even want it, they get to enjoy it. We're monitoring the situation, Madam President. Yesterday, you know, we had a situation in Freeport where individuals had an approval, but they weren't able to bring the goods in before December 1st. We witnessed the approval of about 20 of those coming out of Grand Bahama, and we'll continue to do that. Those who have an approval, but for what they didn't have they didn't have the money to get the stuff in before the deadline, it's now coming in. We're honoring those approvals. Those who are packing, who are just piece doing it, trying to catch themselves, we're going to make sure, Madam President, that they have the benefit of it. But the overall exemption, the blanket exemption, we believe this is the appropriate time to allow those to come to an end. And I said I went through all of those orders and the fact that they, you know, each expired after 6 months, because you can see even the administration at that time was giving themselves the flexibility to be able to end something or to be able to change it. And that is all we're doing, Madam President. We feel that this is the appropriate time to end the blanket, but still allow those individuals who have not fully recovered. And some are going to be years. Some are going to be years. Some would have moved out of the island. Some are just seeking employment. We understand all of that. And that is why we think what we are doing is a good middle ground, a good compromise that would ensure that those who really need it get it. And we will be taking an interest in it, Madam President, to make sure that nobody feels that they have been excluded because of any consideration that deals with origin or politics or anything like that. And so, Madam President, I just wanted to put that into the public domain and ensure the public that, you know, we are working to ensure that people in those disaster areas, we do all we can to make sure that they can get back to as best a sense of normalcy, or as much of a sense of normalcy that is possible after such a devastating disaster. And so, Madam President, with those very few words, I move for second reading and committal of a bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected purposes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Halkitis, for your contribution. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Eurecia Hepburn Forbes.
Good afternoon, Madam President. I rise once again and give thanks to the Prime Minister for his continued confidence to allow me to be a member in this place. I join with my other colleagues in giving condolences to Senator Randy Roll, we should note, as we are coming closer to the holidays, this is a time that we must remember that everyone may not be in a festive season, as several persons are dealing with grief. So let's remember to be kind. Madam President, I also want to take time and give belated birthday greetings to Senator Duncombe, as he has assured me that persons who play numbers, as we call it, were very happy if they knew his birthday date. I would also personally like to thank Ms. Yolanda Delvaux for her assistance and all of the academic affairs teams at Bahamas Agriculture Marine Science Institute, BAMSI, for their continued support. Madam President, some things in life are unchangeable. We are born, we die, and in the Bahamas, we will face tropical storms and hurricanes. In the future, and in areas across the Commonwealth, will experience flooding. And these occurrences are only increasing in frequency and the intensity as climate change strengthens its grip on our islands, further wrestling with the natural spaces around us and eroding our precious resources. The bill for an act to provide a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters is a necessary evolution in the government's push to safeguard and protect their citizens and the country both naturally from occurring and man-made disasters. Madam President, I constantly rise in this place to speak about climate change. And while this bill cannot prevent or thwart climate change, it does provide us with an adaptation strategy. As we discussed mental health bill this morning, we know the effects that disaster plays on one's mental health. So the government is taking strides to ensure that we at least have a policy, a plan, and a proper framework so we can ensure that persons do not have to fight not only with the disasters that are inevitable, but then the coming depression and other mental issues when a disaster hits. Madam President, because we will never be able to pick up the islands of the Bahamas and move them out of the harm's way when hurricanes or tropical storms or flood warnings are issued, the establishment of this authority that will work to ensure the highest level of disaster preparedness, reducing risk to human life, securing our economic platforms, protecting the environment and property is implemented across our society is critical. Madam President, I am happy to state that at BAMSI, we are one of the organizations that is partnering with the Bahamas Met Office to implement a coral reef early warning system, commonly called CRUISE. This system is envisioned to enhance the early warning for improved sectoral and developmental planning. It is anticipated to contribute to the outcomes in improved forecasting, prediction, and information generation for effective development and planning. This outcome is expected to be achieved through the expansion of harmonization of the CARIFORM networks of stations and sensors to monitor climate-related activities such as sea level rise, storm surges, flash floods, droughts, and public health threats. Increase in the knowledge and practical capacity of the Met and marine resource personnel responsible for the maintenance and monitoring station installed, one which will be installed at the edge of BAMSI, I'm excited about, and strengthening the capacities of water managers and users in the dissemination and uptake of climate information for decision making. Madam President, this is wonderful. However, when we provide early warnings, we must ensure that we take into consideration all aspects of our population. We have to ensure that persons who are mentally unable, persons with disabilities, are alerted in whatever forms necessary for them. This is important and near and dear to my heart, Madam President, as I am and have been a member of the Bahamas Red Cross for over 2 decades. And in particular, I've been a disaster team member, which means sometimes right after or during a disaster, you're called out to do work. A complete registry needs to be done for persons with disabilities so there could be lead time to assist these persons, because it makes no sense sending somebody out and you don't realize that you need a handicap capable car to get their wheelchair, or who could even lift a wheelchair when the time comes. We have to ensure that while we are making strides, we're taking all persons into consideration. Madam President, we're not just looking at ad hoc measures to be tossed at problems that have been able to successfully dodge satisfactory solutions. In order to be effective, however, a thoroughly researched and investigated strategic plan that incorporates best practices from nations who are similarly working to protect their citizens is necessary. This, Madam President, as a person, is important to me again, because as the person responsible for paying house insurance at a place where one of the other members work, I can assure you that having a disaster bill where the principle of the policy is supremacy of life, security of health of a person, and their property and livelihood is extremely important for me as persons with their rising costs at their works to ensure their bonuses. Madam President, the purpose of this act is to develop, promote, and implement an approach to disaster risk management that is holistic, comprehensive, integrative, and proactive in lessening the socio-economic and environmental impacts of disaster, especially climate change. The objectives of this act is clear, and there are only two, but two very detailed ones. Develop, promote, and implement an approach to disaster risk management that, 1, is holistic and comprehensive, 2, focuses on reducing risks, including the risks of loss of life, health, physical integrity, economic disruption, and damage to environment and property, especially to those members of the population who are most vulnerable by reason of age, disability, poverty, lack of resources, physical displacement, or gender. And finally, to promote the involvement and participation of all relevant sectors and stakeholders at all levels of the society. That is what you call buy-in, Madam President. Under the umbrella of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and its national policy, the Act calls for the creation of programs and projects that will build a layered approach, inclusive of identifying the responsibility of government to assume financial responsibility for the analysis of risks, educating programs, financial protection, preparedness for, response to, rehabilitation, and recovery from large-scale disasters occurring in the Bahamas. The scope of the national policy will be far-reaching, with coverage ranging from perceived impact of a disaster and its associated risks regarding public investment projects to addressing the duty of an entity to be transparent in communication regarding disaster alerts, disaster risks, and risk activities. Risk analysis, disaster risk reduction, disaster preparedness, financial protection, and the strengthening of the governance framework are at the core of the National Disaster Risk Management Plan. Madam President, in closing, as a member of the Bahamas Red Cross, I know some of the issues that the country has faced firsthand. We are always looking for new volunteers. I encourage us that sit around this table and those that hear the sound of my voice to sign up and become a part of change. I am hopeful for this new bill, and I rise not only to second and support. This will go a long way in assisting persons. God bless us, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. You, Maxine?
Thank you, Senator, the Honorable Dr. Eresia Hepburn Forbes. As many? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President. Oh. So in the pick stock, you don't have anything to do with that. Thank you, Madam President. Yes, it is. Madam President, time surely flies. I think it was last year around this time when the Zonta Club visited us and brought us all T-shirts to commemorate 16 days of activism to end violence against women and girls. And we're still in that period, Madam President, and so people would notice that the town is painted orange to raise awareness. And that's a part of a global, not just local campaign to end gender-based violence. And so it started on the 25th of November, which was actually the UN's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And that 16-day period, Madam President, ends on December 10th, my son's birthday actually, which is also International Human Rights Day. And so I continue to wear my orange ribbon. And of course, beyond the 16 days, the activism continues. And so we must all do our part to protect our mothers and daughters, our sisters, our aunts, our neighbors against any form of violence. And of course, if anyone knows anyone who's experiencing any challenges, I encourage them to call the 24-hour Crisis Center hotline. Madam President, recently we would have celebrated the 60th anniversary of women's suffrage in our country, and I'd like to, again, in this place actually, extend formal thanks to the Speaker of the House for inviting us to a joint session on the 23rd of November, and to the parliamentarians in the other chamber for hosting us and accommodating us, and of course to the Caribbean Women in Parliament and the caucus here that would have worked together to really raise awareness of some of the accomplishments of women in our country over the past 60 years in certain areas. And so, as we would have heard that day, women have really come a far way. Of course, we have a way to go, but we have done exceptionally well. And I encourage women to continue to break ceilings, to break, these glass ceilings, and to make way for the little girls in our Commonwealth. Madam President, like you, I would like to extend sympathy to our dear Senator Randy Roll on the passing of his mom. As you would have said, death is very difficult, very, very hard. And I can only imagine, though I would not know personally, that losing a mother as an extra element of difficulty to process. And so, as would have been mentioned, we all stand with him during this difficult time. Our prayers, our support, and anything else we can do to help ease the burden of just dealing with grief itself and the challenge. I would also like to extend sympathy to Lorraine, the wife, and the children, including former Senator Tanya McCartney of MCM Alfonso Boogaloo Elliott from our party, the Free National Movement, who would have passed at 80 years old. And so, along with Senator Roll's mother, may his soul rest in peace. Madam President, I rise in support of the bill before the Senate today, the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022, which seeks to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for related matters. Madam President, obviously this bill aims to ensure the overall safety of the citizens and residents of our country during disasters. And there are so many aspects of the 67 pages that we could speak to. But for me, the communication aspect of disaster risk management is close to my heart. This area of study falls under communication for social and behavior change, which I would have studied at the graduate level on the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies some years ago. And we would have studied, of course, risk management, crisis communication, emergency preparedness and planning, health communication, and all of these other specialized forms of communication. And Madam President, just to put it very simply for everyone, communication is simply shared meaning. And so if we send a message to somebody and they don't get the message in the way we intended them to receive it, we haven't communicated. We have sent a message, but we have not communicated. And so, for example, you know, and I don't know what, I guess young people don't say this anymore these days, but sometimes they say, you know, that's a bad suit you have on. Well, if you tell your grandfather that's a bad suit you have on, and you hurt his feelings, and he's upset at you for being so insulting, obviously you haven't really relayed to him what you intended to relay to him. Communication is a very specialized field, and it's important, especially when we're dealing with disasters, to be effective at it. And Madam President, just as someone who is really good on a calculator isn't automatically an accountant, I have to say that everyone who knows how to construct a sentence isn't a communicologist. And the challenge is that sometimes we confuse what communication is and who is equipped or specialized to do it, and we mix it up with PR, journalism, marketing, etc. But disaster risk communication is very critical, and I really want to encourage us to ensure that when we are establishing working groups and committees and councils, and we're getting specialists and we're working out our preparedness plan, that we ensure that we are really engaging persons who are specialists at social and behavior change communication, because it's a very specialized field. When I would have studied it, I would have been in class with representatives from the UN, Red Cross, the water company in Jamaica, NGOs, and other places in government who were very intent on ensuring that in disasters, that communication is effective. Madam President, during disasters, we must communicate clearly, must be properly coordinated, and it must be seen as credible. The reality is that in a disaster, people panic, they get fearful, you know, there's misconceptions, there's miscommunication, you know, rumors start to spread, and all of this pretty much inhibits people's ability to really properly respond to the situation. And effective communication helps to mitigate the health and social and economic costs that could result from such disasters. And so, Madam President, what social and behavior change communication does as a part of disaster risk management is it really looks at the behavioral and social aspects and risk associated with disasters and emergencies. So, for example, you know, you go into a community and you tell an older person who's lived in that community for 60 years that they need to leave their home, evacuate, you know, get to safety, and you just can't understand why. I send them the flyer, I told them why they can't just get it, and why wouldn't they value human life over their property. And this is where behavior change communication comes in, because we have to understand the background. We have to understand how hard, how long these people worked for their homes, how they secured it, what it means to them. They're concerned about looting. They've survived for 60 years and nothing happened to them. And now you're telling them this one is a big one. You know, climate change is happening and you need to be afraid. But, you know, they've sat out storms there before. And this is why it's so important when it comes to communication to really look at it from a technical perspective and aspect, and really looked at it as a specialized area when it comes to disaster risk management and planning and preparedness. So, Madam President, our communication efforts as a country, they need to be in sync, they need to be relevant, and they need to be aligned with the preparedness, the technical teams. And even when if a disaster gets out of hand or is managed as soon as possible, is really dependent, in my opinion, on timely, strong, simplified, and united communication from various stakeholders. And so even when it comes to communication, you're able to detect right away if there are rumors or even barriers that could be addressed really early on. And so, Madam President, in establishing the authority, it's very important to get toward a national SBCC, or Social and Behavior Change Communication Disaster Risk Management Plan. And so we're properly equipped to respond, okay, so that we could be equipped to respond and that we could communicate to all of the population, the citizens and residents, and make sure that they're clear and they're understanding what we're saying. For me, Madam President, today, I'd like to focus on three groupings that I feel as if sometimes we overlook when it comes to communication and preparedness. And those three groupings, Madam President, are persons with disabilities, the elderly, and the migrant population. Madam President, being visually impaired or hearing impaired can be a hindrance, even in regular daily life. And many persons with disabilities in our society, they describe a feeling of isolation from the world, right? And really communicating with others can be a very difficult task, even on a regular day, trying to get a message across to, someone who is impaired in some way, or them trying to get a message across to you can be a challenge. But now when there's a disaster, it becomes even more complex or complicated. And many persons who have, visual impairments or hearing impairments or physical and other impairments, they already feel excluded. But for sure, Madam President, as a country, when it comes to national or natural or any disasters, we should ensure inclusion. And I have to say, Madam President, that this is the one occasion, the singular occasion that I could recall in recent memory when my good senator, who went ahead of me, and I are completely aligned and in agreement when it comes to being inclusive, when it comes to disaster risk management. And Madam President, during Dorian, residents described the horrors. You have 200 miles per hour winds and powerful storm surges, and everyone's lives are really put at risk. And they talk about seeking refuge, Madam President, in the roofs of their homes and vehicles, and some of them seeking refuge in palm trees. And so just imagine, when you have 8-foot water, reaching night, you are 2-story buildings high, and people may be going up in the roof, but you can't go in the roof because you're immobile, because you have a disability. And we need to be mindful of these things when it comes to disaster risk management and planning and preparedness, because people need to be moved, and persons who have disabilities cannot necessarily be moved the traditional or classic way, the way everyone else moves. They may not be mobile. They may not be able to drive. They may not have access to specialized vehicles or be able to take their, whether it's a wheelchair or whether it's a specialized hospital bed, along with them. And so we need to plan so that, like she said, there's a register. We know what their needs are. We have time to get them out in time. By whatever specialized vehicle, we need to get them out and get them to safety. And when we get them to safety, Madam President, we have to make sure that the shelters are accessible. You have to make sure that the shelters are accessible and that they can function at these shelters, that they could get, up there, that there are ramps, that when they get inside, that the bathrooms are accessible, and that the people in the shelters are sensitized and they understand how to deal with persons with disabilities. And so all of this comes as part of the planning, Madam President. And we would all recall some of the disturbing videos, that were circulating after Dorian. And Madam President, the Bahamian father who in a televised interview recalls having to hold on to his son who had autism for dear life during the storm surge. Madam President, people having to decide whether or not to save their mother or their child. And just imagine having to decide whether to save a limb, or your life. These are very real choices that people with disability face, and that we need to plan for ahead of time. Once we have, and we can establish a register, we can know what their needs are, and we can address and respond to those needs. Madam President, it's just preparing for disasters in general is a lot of pressure. And like I said, being a person with disabilities, there's so many other considerations because even going to a shelter, they tell you to pack small. And let's just say you have a walker or you have, you know, crutches, but you also have a wheelchair or you have a specialized bed. You're leaving all of this stuff behind and you really don't know, you know, if you pack small and it all goes away, how will you become mobile again and function, you know, once whatever the disaster has passed? Because the reality is that being able to be independent, being able to be mobile is one of the biggest desires and requirements for persons with disabilities because they want to be able to function on their own independently without having to lean on others for support or without having to go to others for support. And so, Madam President, even in the bill, you know, it talks about social welfare, it talks about health, but we specify, you know, payment, finances, etc. So even though the bill may not specify it, you know, I'd like to see a disability consultant appointed to when the minister puts together his committee on disaster risk management, because that person would be able to help, you know, address and anticipate what the needs of that special community might be. In addition, Madam President, whenever we do our simulations and we are, you know, figuring out what we should do, because a part of obviously coming up with a plan and being prepared is to actually test the plan. And so as we do that, I encourage us to really involve persons with disabilities, make sure that they're part of the simulation so we could know, okay, if we have to get them out, or if we have to do something, how do we do it? How quickly do we do it? Even, Madam President, for children in general, and children with disabilities, we know that children, some children, especially those in group homes or just children in general, they need special protection and they need to be secured. And so when we consider shelters, we have to consider, what if we had to evacuate a group home, all of those children? Do we mix them in with the regular population in a shelter setting? How do we make sure that we have extra protections for our children and for our persons with disabilities? So right down to the nitty gritty, as we would say, as we plan, as we prepare, we need to think it through and we need to have an idea how we will address it if it occurs. Madam President, it is very imperative that we consider persons with disabilities. And I am during an emergency, I'm very happy to hear the seconder say that. Of course, I know that's close to our heart. And as we all continue to advocate, I would like to hope that we ensure inclusion, even in terms of our alert services and messages, which I think she would have spoken to, because the reality is that we're not often self-aware. We don't think through these things. People who are deaf or who have hearing impairments, they can't hear the alerts if you send them out on radio or television or other audible services, such as Amber Alerts on cellular devices or mobile devices. They may not be able to hear it. People who are visually impaired, you know, just because emergency vehicles are moving to and fro and, you know, the flashing lights are there, they cannot take visual cues the way the rest of us do and respond to the bright flashing lights. So in the threat of a natural disaster, it's very critical that the government establishes, Madam President, an effective communication service system, as well, of course, the app, and we expand on it and make sure that it's functioning properly so persons with disabilities can be included. Madam President, even in terms of, in clause 21, when we talk about national humanitarian assistance standard programs, and we talk about water supply and promotion of sanitation and hygiene and food security, nutrition, shelter, settlement, and health. You know, health is pretty vague, but again, when we talk about health and we talk about persons with disabilities, in addition to prescribed medication, we're talking about walking canes, we're talking about wheelchairs, we're talking about prosthetic devices, you know, and things that they really need in order to function and that they need to be mobile. And so we need to figure out how we could help provide some of these resources if necessary and if they are destroyed in any way during a disaster. And so I look forward to, of course, all of that as part of the work of the authority. Madam President, I would have also mentioned the elderly. And Madam President, these are the groupings in our country that I really want us to to pay close attention to as we look at everything that this bill outlines. Everything that whether it's the early warning system, whatever it is in terms of the public and how they participate, and we get funding from international bodies and alerts and everything we do, we have to really, really seriously consider in disasters how we protect our most vulnerable. Madam President, on Saturday past, I went to the mall with my mom and my daughter to pick up something. And I found myself walking at what I considered a normal pace. But initially, I had left my mom quite a few feet behind. And so I had to pause and slow down and find myself walking with her at her pace. And even at my natural normal pace, found myself speeding up a little bit again. And then I had to slow down again and hold her hand, which helped me to stay on pace with her. Madam President, even if you're picking an elderly up to maybe, I know you're very involved and you talk about your relatives, whether it's to go to church or another function, we know we have to allow for extra time for them to get ready and figure out what they need and, really be ready to go. And so the reality is that dealing with elderly persons takes patience. We have to go slower. We have to consider that they go slower. And so even when we start to plan for disaster risk management, we have to remember that when we're planning for the elderly, depending on when we send a notice out or depending on how long, we give them to be prepared or to really consider how long we need to evacuate them, we have to understand too, you can't always do it depending on how soon we know or how much lead time we have depending on the disaster. Of course, new weather systems and radars and stuff really help to help us to know sooner ahead of time. But Madam President, we really have to allow for them to be able to, maybe move a little more slowly. We can't necessarily, like we tell everyone else, okay, hurry, grab, get to the door, be in the shelter. We have to be mindful of the extra time it might take, the extra effort, the extra patience it might take to deal with someone who's older, even in terms of, again, like I said, sensitizing people who manage shelters and work with shelters in terms of whether or not it's a person with disability or an elderly person. Let's say a shelter only has 2 bathrooms and has hundreds of people in it. Just as an example of that's not ideal, but we never know, we may find ourselves in this situation. And so a person with a disability or an elderly person might take a little longer and there may start to be a queue. So we have to figure out, how do we make these places accessible? How do we give them the support? How do we address them? Persons on the other islands other than New Providence who may be senior citizens, persons who have given to our country. We have to make sure that we secure them during natural disasters and hurricanes in particular. Like we said, they're getting fiercer as time goes by. And I think, as the good senator said, we could be sure that we're going to see them. And they put a lot of strain on persons, the mobility of elderly, the mental health of elderly. The reality is that elderly persons can even become disoriented when they're outside of their regular setting because they need these markers to help them exist and function. So even in terms of evacuating them and really planning for them, we have to be sure that we take all of that into consideration, Madam President. And so we also need to make sure that we educate ourselves and how to really deal with persons with disabilities, how to deal with the elderly. And these resources and education needs to take place year round. And that's what I'm hoping to see with the authority, not just during hurricane season, not just when, a storm might be imminent or we think something is going to happen, but we need to make sure that year round that we equip even our children in our schools. We know that in the United States, for example, since they've had unfortunate incidents like school shootings, they teach preschoolers songs. They teach them where to go, where to hide under the desk, how to go in the closet. They literally have training at preschools, how to stay very still, not to move. They teach preschoolers these things. And we need to start to teach our children what to do in the event of a disaster, what to do if a storm is threatening. And all of that needs to be a part of the year-round communication process and really making sure that we're equipped to deal with this. And not just we as in, the average adult, working adult age in our country, but the elderly, persons with disabilities, and the children, Madam President. And so even like I said, on a day-to-day basis, seniors maybe need a little more time at the ATM, at the pharmacy, at the grocery store, and so we definitely need to take that in consideration. Even in terms of transportation, Madam President, when it comes to the elderly, as we talked about persons with disabilities, they may need specialized vehicles in order to be evacuated depending on their condition. And likewise, the elderly might also need to have special consideration when it comes to transportation, before and after a disaster. And so when roads are impassable or they may not be able to move around on, public transportation or whatever ways they may be accustomed to moving, we have to consider them being able to restock their food if they hopefully get back in their home safely, and, be able to restock their medication and just really be able to function after a disaster. Of course, we just have to ensure overall that we are inclusive and that everyone is taken care of. And so, Madam President, I mentioned a specialized consultant. And like I said, social welfare, that's broad. And so when we're looking at someone who specializes, whether it's in persons with disability or the elderly, I think we should consider that the board that's established under Section 27, that we could perhaps have a fixed member that, really acts or specifically is able to deal with and speak for and plan for persons in these special communities. Madam President, thank you, good Senator. Madam President, the reality is that when it comes to undocumented migrants, when there's a disaster, we have to put public safety first as a country. And so we don't want to allow our immigration policies to put people and people's lives at risk. And so, Madam President, we know that, fear of enforcement of our immigration policies and the reality is the, fear of perhaps being detained or being repatriated, I'm sure often stifles persons who may want to evacuate or seek shelter during disasters. And so, Madam President, we need to be clear that we should suspend such actions during these periods. And we need to really communicate clearly with undocumented migrants in their language, of course, which, again, when it comes to communication, I mean, you really can't communicate with anyone if you don't speak the same language. You go to France and you're in the middle of the square there and you need something. If you start to speak in English and ask someone for it, unless they speak English, you might be in trouble. So the reality is that as a country, when it comes to lives and people's lives, and we're preparing for disaster, we also have to consider the migrant community and ensuring that we get the messages to them and that we don't put their families in the agonizing position of choosing between their safety and the possibility of being, having the laws enforced. And I just want to be clear, entering any country without doing so through the legal process is completely unacceptable. However, when it comes to being humanitarian on occasions such as disasters, emergencies, we have to consider that, immigration status should not prohibit the right to basic safety, Madam President, for you and for your family during these times. And so we have to take them into consideration as well as we plan, as the authority plan, even in terms of whether or not they do come to the facilities, could we have someone at shelters who might be multilingual, not even bilingual, because there are migrant populations from various countries who are in our country. And so we have to consider that and be sensitive toward it. So what am I saying, Madam President? Disasters level the playing field. We learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, Dorian, any example you give. It doesn't matter what sphere of life you come from. Doesn't matter who you think you are. It doesn't matter what you think you have. Doesn't matter what you drive. It doesn't matter how nice your home is. Depending on the category of the storm that's headed our way, it levels the playing field. We all become people, humans, who want to survive, who want to preserve our life. And the reality is that as a country, we have a duty to all of our citizens and residents. But especially, I don't want us to forget the persons with disabilities. I don't want us to forget the elderly. I don't want us to forget the children, Madam President. And I don't want us to forget the migrant community, those documented and undocumented. So we have to make sure that as we plan, as we prepare, as we consult, as we develop our communication strategies, that we take into consideration all the different channels, all the different aspects of communication. We take into consideration the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, the physically impaired, those with mental health challenges, those in group homes, Madam President, the elderly, the children, those who may not originally be from here, those who may be naturalized, those who may be undocumented. We need to consider them all, because at the end of the day, Madam President, I had an opportunity this morning to go to the BAPD, the Bahamas Association for Physically Disabled, their gift day. And the children, they put on a play or skit. And their skit, they had two skits, Madam President. One was called The Greatest Gift, and the other one was Bahamian 12 Days of Christmas. And I have to tell you, they did a wonderful, wonderful job, Madam President. And the reality is that as they performed, the children with disabilities are no different from any other child. You know, I had a chance to meet some of them. They seem the same. They're excited. They're excited about Christmas. You know, they're happy. You know, they love themselves. You know, one boy, you know, he has locks. I think he's about 13. His mom said, you know, he wanted to grow them because his uncle has them. They're very aware. They're mindful of themselves and of their spaces. And they deserve our care, our protection, just like every other citizen and resident. So as we prepare for disasters, as we prepare to manage the risk, to mitigate the risk, as we prepare, Madam President, we have to remember that it can't all be, you know, televised messages from, you know, the office of the Prime Minister. And I'm not saying that to, you know, in any way. I'm just saying that we've come to a place as a country where we believe, like, turn the TV on at this time because we're going to hear. And I have to say that I commend the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas for always having, or I can't say always, but usually having at least somebody to do sign language. You know, we have to make sure we have closed captioning. And so persons can read, because we can't all gather around the TV in our homes, which we traditionally do, and hear what NEMA, you know, whether it's Captain Russell or whoever else is saying about the storm and where it's headed. We have to remember that not everyone can see. Not everyone can hear. And not everyone can digest information the same way. And this is why, as we treat communication as a specialized area, we'll be able to consider the channels. We'll be able to consider the sender, the receiver, the barriers, the noise, the interruptions, the disruptions, the rumors, the things that may prohibit or inhibit. It's just like the pandemic. You could tell people to get vaccinated as much as you want, but they already watched a couple of videos from self-declared doctors on WhatsApp, and you talking to yourself. And so we have to consider communication, like I said, as a specialized field. We have to consider social and behavior change communication as we prepare for disaster risk management in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, like I said, I support this bill, and I look forward to seeing much done to ensure that the most vulnerable among us are protected during times of disaster. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock.
No, I'm not. Madam President, fellow colleagues, good evening. Madam President, I would like to join you and my fellow colleagues and also wishing Senator Duncombe a happy birthday. And may you live to see many more, my brother. Good. Madam President, the bill before us today, the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022, seeks to provide a fluid, workable, encompassing streamlining of how we, as a people, as a country, will manage and prepare for disasters. Madam President, this is a very somber topic. It is a very serious topic. It is a topic that, whilst we must address it and move on all fronts to be ready to mitigate such occurrences, we remain in prayer that we be spared further disruption, dislocation, economic meltdowns, and tragedies as Dorian and hurricanes before brought us. Let me very quickly go out front in reminding Bahamians that disaster is not another word for hurricane or storm. Hurricanes and storms are disasters. Yes, there are other disasters as well, which are not as a result of weather or climate. This legislation is preparing a protocol and establishing a policy as to how this country will be guided in such disasters, which can come in forms other than the dreaded hurricanes and storms we have traditionally suffered. Madam President, as gloomy as the prospects of which this bill speaks, I must also acknowledge that this legislation demonstrates very, very clearly the high level of intellect involved in the public policy, the distinguished levels of all interconnected government and private sector agencies, consensus, and the government's stellar commitment to modernize legislative frames for the newer nuance and circumstances and cultures of this new century in which we live. And just as importantly, this bill shows how we relate to the international world and assures millions of persons who come here as tourists that we are not a banana republic. We are a modern, efficient, astute, highly intelligent, and resourceful people, and we are always ready for whatever the wind may blow our way. This legislation will consume and replace the overlapping of certain agencies which were created ad hoc in the time of crisis, and in more ways than beneficial were confusing to the general public at times. Madam President, I feel at times we use this word disaster as if it is such a non-emotive, a noun, when we know it to be a nasty, ferocious, destructive verb. When people hear the word disaster, we expect panic and we expect fear. What this bill will do is help to calm and allay those fears and concerns. The Bahamian people will know what will unfold, what will play out, what agencies of the state and volunteer relief and rescue agencies are involved, where to go to seek help, emergency assistance, funding, and how we mitigate the peculiar disaster, Madam President. Our people watch more international news and social media per capita. I dare say, so than any other nook and cranny on the face of the earth, of this earth. And so we, the Bahamian, are well aware that what causes an earthquake, well aware of what causes an earthquake, where a tsunami fault line may rest. The Tropic of Cancer passes through Long Island. We sit in a hurricane trajectory. Climate change and rising sea levels will put more than 70% of land mass on which we live and reside today in peril and jeopardy. Our people are aware of the issues of flooding and intense waves of heat and brush fires and snowstorms and blizzards which their phones and televisions give them a front row seat to every minute of the day. Madam President, I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm only trying to cover the scope of disasters which are prevalent today and of which the Bahamas must be ready to handle. We are so proud of our new cruise port, and we boast of millions of persons cruise ships transport to our country every year. Madam President, in the mid-1960s, the Tribune newspaper and its journalist Nikki Kelly was awarded a coveted international prize in journalism for the coverage of a major cruise ship named the Umouth Castle, which caught fire not far from Nassau Port. It was a disaster. These are disasters, or should I say accidents, which blossom into major disasters. And then, Madam President, this bill provides for the scope of highly specialized training and equipment and apparatus and other personnel that may have to be activated in times of a particular disaster. Madam President, I want to quote Miles Sirota, who's the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, in the other place in seconding the bill over there. This is his overview of what the bill seeks to achieve, and he is the minister responsible for disaster and preparedness. And I quote, "There were 3 agencies at one point. There was NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency. There was the Ministry of Disaster, Preparedness and Reconstruction. And then there was the DRA, Disaster Reconstruction Authority, which was formed basically for that hurricane zone of Dorian, and being zone of Dorian being East Grand Bahama and Abaco, in particular the Marsh Harbor area. What we have with 3 different entities is a replication and overlapping of duties and personalities. When NEMA as an institution was founded, it was basically to serve as a coordinating agency in an impending storm. And so it basically functioned during hurricane season, where you got all of the relevant government agencies together. We need to have an agency that functions year-round. So, apart from just looking at hurricanes, we are dealing with disasters, risk of disasters, resilience, mitigation, and recovery. And so now we are moving away from not just worrying about how we are going to take care of the country in an impending storm, but we are looking at disaster risk outside of hurricane season. If we can identify those risks, if we can mitigate those risks, it puts us in a better position that even though there is an impending disaster, we will be much more prepared and the recovery time will be less, end quote. Madam President, the Bahamian people will know where approved information and messaging will come from during a storm. The Bahamian people will know when certain locations and environs are declared unsafe and detrimental to life. They will know, Madam President, when to abandon their location and go to a safe place. Emergency workers will carry out search and rescue, and persons who willfully ignore certain warnings of danger will know that emergency workers should not have to encounter unnecessary and/or risk created by negligence. Shelters will be properly and timely advertised, and equipped and rescue and mitigating equipment will be made available to communities. Madam President, we must prepare for what this world teaches us every day about uncertainty. We cannot take anything for granted. We have to thrive off the science of the times and move away from superstitions and alarmist theories. You know that one about if the wasp is making its nest high up in the tree, that means no hurricane this year. If the wasp is making its nest high up in the tree, that means there's no hurricane this year. That's a superstition. Huh? But but if the wasp, but if the wasp is making his nest in the lower places, under window panes, under brush, get ready for the storm. Madam President, the 21st century has also given us the sophisticated technological access to information on what is going on in the sky above us, the sea that surrounds us, and the earth beneath our feet. I will be the last to advocate that we separate ourselves from Mother Nature's wit, but the times in which we will demands that we also be completely responsible. When the order comes to evacuate, we must heed the order and save our own lives and the lives of others. Madam President, this disaster risk management bill is ambitious and timely and precise and encompassing. Our job is not to hide it under a bushel, but get this bill passed and get it into the hands of every Bahamian so we all know the law and what is required of us. We can't wait for a disaster to happen to attempt a familiarization exercise. This will require community leadership and support. We cannot wish the world would stop and the Bahamas can get off, just as the world spins its axis, what goes around also comes around. And we must be ready. The government is to be applauded for the maturity in which it has approached this. What we saw in the past has been a rank dispatch of politics in times of national emergency and disaster. We saw how one political party used the disaster to feather its own nests with cherry-picked jobs and posts for persons who ended up in controversy. Madam President, the very chair in which you sit today was vacated by another holder who went off to take on a political position born out of a natural disaster. And we all know that did not seem to have ended well. Madam President, it is my hope that our country will begin to look at how the insurance industry can be better fitted to provide affordable products to the Bahamian people and businesses in times of disaster. Madam President, I support this disaster risk management bill. This is one of the most progressive and well-researched and planned pieces of legislation which speaks to the time and age and circumstance of the world in which we now live. Madam President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield.
Also extending a warm birthday greetings to our colleague, Senator Duncan. I also want to say to him that that chocolate cake looks good, but we prefer something from the Swiss bakers. As that is a bit heavy. that is a bit heavy, right? I want to begin by, even if I have it in here somewhere, I want to begin by acknowledging the rationalization of the policy on search given by the Noble Minister, who I consider a scholar, a friend, and a decent human being. And I hold him to yeah, and he's a fisherman, you know, so we held to a higher standard, right? I hold him to his word that there will be no political interference and the consideration for applications made for certs, but I also recommend that perhaps the applications can be placed in the local government districts. You know, when you think about places like Abaco and Grand Bahama, they kind of spread out, and for someone to drive from 8 Mile Rock to the government complex, or from Crown Haven to the government complex, is quite a long trek. And so we understand the rationalization. We were once there, and you were quite right to consider that we did them for 6 months because there had to have been reviews. But we also appreciate that some people are in a different state of recovery, and so they're not always going to be ready to do everything at the same time. And so there must be consideration given to those individuals who seek to slowly recover. With that said, Madam President, absolutely. I give it when it's due. I give it when it's due. Madam President, I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this debate on the Disaster Risk Management Bill 2022, which seeks to provide a comprehensive approach to disaster risk management in the Bahamas. God knows, as a country that exists in the hurricane belt, we need an all-inclusive plan to coordinate, activate, recover, and build resilience in this country after an event. The senator who spoke before me is quite right. We focus on disasters as natural disasters, but there are always so, you know, my mommy used to always say some of us can't stand prosperity. I can hear her voice right now. Some people can't stand prosperity. Right? Right? You know, yeah. I share the view expressed that, you remember the incident with the sea hauler? A very dramatic, very tragic incident when there was some homegoing or regatta or something they were preparing for, and you had a crash at sea. And so these too must be a part of the disaster mitigation and plan. And we're going to have to get our people to the place where they appreciate that, you know, you can't just jump on a boat with 100 people and 10 life vests, or a life raft that can only rescue or recover 50 persons. And so all of these things must be looked at when we look at. The other day we had an oil spill in the Ixomas. These also are part of these type of exercises that we must look at. But my experience with Dorian caused me to think about, when I looked at this bill, a few things that I'd like to share, Madam President, before I take my seat. A number of them were addressed, but I'll go through this. The bill, among other things, provides for the establishment of a Disaster Risk Management Authority that will replace NEMA and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority, the DRA. Moreover, it provides for the responsibilities of administrators, the appointment of Disaster Risk Management Consultative Committee, responsibilities of public bodies, disaster response, rehabilitation, recovery, public participation, receiving international assistance, and so on. I didn't dwell on this point of receiving international assistance, but Bahamians need to appreciate that there are groups who exist for disaster, and they travel all over the world when there is a disaster. And Bishop Clark used to say, sometimes when he preached, all their hands ain't clean. And so the government has a responsibility to ferret out those with unclean hands. We're not castigating those who come. We want you to come. At one point, after Dorian, I think we gave permission for some 1,500 to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to come and to assist our people who are in dire need of assistance. But some come to pray, not kneel down and pray, right? If you remember, and you probably experienced this, right? If you remember, there is quake in Haiti. We saw what happened. There were tons of promises made, but very little came to fruition. The same thing happened in the Bahamas. You know, many promises were made in the conference that we had organized by the UN, but very little was manifested after that. And so, Madam President, One of the reasons why the DRA was established, regardless of your views of the DRA and who moved from where to where to who, right? It's because the DRA, we thought, would have been a ready response to avoid bureaucratic inertia. But government works is a big machinery. Big ships, they turn slowly. Sometimes you turn them too fast, the rudder's stuck, and you can't correct your slide. And so government moves very slowly sometimes. And so we thought an authority would be able to expedite, in the interest of the people affected, impacted, the things that they needed in order to quickly recover. So for all of its good intentions, I believe that this bill represents many, many moving parts. And in my experience is, Minister Halkitis, is where you have a lot of moving parts, you have a lot of inertia. But that be as it may, we'll see where we go. I hope that is not the case with this bill. You addressed section 22 of the bill, which provides for an interministerial committee, and we had the very same thought on it. I made a note on it. I said, it seemed to me like each member of this committee is a member of the cabinet. And so you may as well have determined that this committee would have consisted of the entire cabinet. The only one I didn't see there, which I thought might be necessary to be there because of the migrant population which Senator Seymour spoke of, maybe the Minister for Immigration. And Senator, we did go into the mud and the pea. I did so personally on more than one occasion with Creole speakers from the police and defense force. And we asked the individuals residing in those places to move. And we used strong language. We said, if you do not move, you're going to die. And to a man and to a woman in Creole, the answer was, we will move. And I said, what time? And in unison, it was like 6 o'clock. And I said, do you appreciate that you live right in front of the harbor? This storm will come on a king tide, which is very high, excess of 20 feet. And when this water lands, it will land in the center of your community. And that's exactly what happened. And we indicated to them as well. We indicated to them as well that we're not concerned with your immigration status. We're not concerned with that at all. The only thing we are concerned about is your safety. And in the eye of the storm, we found ourselves having to open the government complex to allow hundreds of people in from those communities and from the wider communities in central Albuquerque. Thank God we were able to do that. Section 56 of the bill sets out evacuation orders. This is another tricky area when you're dealing with disaster management. Rightly, as Senator Seymour indicated, Bahamians don't believe they should move from their homes. And that's not a phenomenon just central to the Bahamas. People all over the world don't feel like they should move from their homes. I heard somebody say, listen, I have lasted on this key through Betsy, through Floyd, through Andrew, and Irma. I don't need to move nowhere. And, you know, thank God in the Albuquerque keys, when you look at Elbow Key, which we normally call Hopetown, Manawar, Guana Key, we had some horrific stories, but we had no loss of life. And I found that amazing because the eye of Dorian came right across Elbow Key, straight into Marsh Harbor. And I found that amazing that we had no casualties in those small keys. In the end, however, I don't know how effective this piece in Section 56 will be, Madam President, because I really don't know how effective it's going to be if we can't tell people. Section 56, I think, deals with evacuation, right? If we can't go into a community that has an impending storm, the likes of Dorian, a Category 5, and I hear people talk the stories about Dorian. Dorian had consistent winds of 180 miles per hour. It gusted at over 250 miles per hour, gusts, right? And it seemed like that went on for 3 days. I probably was in one of those mental states that we were talking about this morning, why it seemed like such a long period. I remember calling Crazy Thompson in Grand Bahama, and we did get some communications. And I said, Crazy, I don't know what you have planned for. I may have said that here before, but whatever it is, do 10 times more, because this is a very, very dangerous storm. Subsection 2 of this section 56 sets out prohibitions for affected areas as follows. And here's what this section points out to us. It restricts, or it seeks to restrict, movement of persons, the imposition of a general and specific curfew, restriction of travel routes, closure of public and private businesses, empowering authorities to use force to maintain order, among other things. Now, in my mind, I stand corrected by any of the attorneys here, but in my mind, this can only be enforced through Article 29 of the Constitution, where you invoke the powers of war or emergency. It can only be enforced that way. That is why, at the end of the day, you can check it, brother, 29. That is why, at the end of the day, you heard the Minister of National Security say in the other place that we are not going to put responders into harm's way to come and rescue individuals after the arrival of this event. And that is a policy that the government of Bahamas has followed for a while now. In Dorian, we had people calling in from all over the place, saying that they're in peril, they're in roofs, they're in cars, they're in wherever they could be. But we could not send the police officers and the defense force officers out into that 250-mile-per-hour wind to rescue anyone until we thought it was safe enough for them to venture out of the command center and go and do their thing. Subsection 3 essentially absolves the government of any responsibility, if you look at it, to those who refuse to evacuate when ordered to do so. It heralds that first responders will not be exposed to danger to rescue anyone who refuses to evacuate when ordered. Now, I'm going to say something here some people may think is a little bit radical. But I believe it's time for the Bahamas government to consider, for us to consider, a mandatory evacuation order. You know way to play around with that. You know way to play around with that. Now I know you may have I wish the Attorney General was here. I know you may have conflicting views on this, because we invoked Article 29 to restrict the movement of people in COVID. And we had no other choice. We allowed people to move freely all over this country and all over these islands. We had 2 tertiary level healthcare institutions that could treat people with COVID. If you caught COVID in the Family Islands, you would have to be flown out. And if you was the size of my good brother, Russell, it would have been very difficult to get you in one of the tents, to put you in an aircraft, to get you into Princess Margaret Hospital, or to get you into the RAN, in the air ambulance. So at some point, right, we're going to have to consider making the tough decision, because at the end of the day, here's what happened, and it's exactly what happened in Albuquerque. We went in and we said, you got to move or you're going to die. People determined they're going to stay, and some died. The government still took the blame for that, right? Even though you did all you could. And then you might have someone who has a relative stuck in an area that is being impacted. How you can stop them from going to rescue their uncle or their aunt or their mom or their grandfather or whomever is close to them? But you want to restrict movements. Now, I understand the use of force, because you cannot allow things to get out of order and out of hand. And in Dorian, we saw a tremendous amount of looting and that kind of thing. And this is not restrictive to what happened in Dorian. If you look at one of the French islands, when they had the hurricane, Martinique, I think it was, they had to send in the French army to calm things down. So after these catastrophic events, it is normal that people will seek to survive. And you become, I don't know what you all saw in Grand Bahama in the way of that. Not too much, yeah? That's good. But people do that. So for that reason, Madam President, I'm of the view that we must make a determination for mandatory orders. Everything you do as a government is not always going to be popular. Some things governments are forced to do in the interest of the people that we are called to serve. And it is pointless for you to come to me and tell me more about a house that I survived in from Betsy. And Betsy was like 1965? Betsy was like in 1965. And I remember vaguely as a little boy peeping through the window, them chopping the coconut tree off the roof and that kind of thing. So you see, I dated myself, right? He's a youngster. He's a youngster, right? And so without mandatory evacuation orders, we will see, God forbid, the same outcome as we did with Dorian, where residents in many instances, many communities and keys on the shorelines, in the exposed areas, refused to move. You have some, I want to talk about our island administrators. We have some very, very committed out island administrators. I worked with one in the storm. Her name was Maxine Duncan. Did a yeoman's effort. And island administrators are called upon to really be their disaster preparedness committee in the island, and they work along with the local government practitioners. And they do all that they can to prepare their areas of operation for impending storms. Section 6 of the bill provides for the principles of the policy and subsection paragraph C indicates that it is the duty of the government to intervene and take responsibility for a disaster which exceeds the capacity of an administrator. No island administrator should be called upon to manage an event the size of Dorian. None. I believe we are long past that time. And I believe when we have impending events like Dorian, we anticipate these events. We need to find a way to find the professionals who have been trained, solely focused on disaster preparedness and disaster management and recovery to deal with these events. Think about an island administrator who herself has to secure herself, who herself is concerned about her own safety, the safety of her family. And you in this island, and we're calling upon you to manage an event the size of Dorian. I just think it's unfair. And I wholeheartedly agree with this provision that the government needs to step in when it's beyond the administrator's capacity, but I believe they should do so earlier. I believe the government should step in earlier. What we have been doing over the years is sending advance parties from the Defense Force to go in and assist with preparations and to assist in the immediate aftermath with clearing harbors and ports and airports so that we can get assistance in there. We call them advance teams. But we need to send with the advance team a professional disaster risk manager who could perhaps use those expertise. Because the local government practitioners who work along with the administrator in Abaco, I can tell you, they disappeared. The one that I saw consistently, God rest his soul, was my brother Wado Boodle, who died after the storm, not in the storm. May he continue to rest in peace. And the local government practitioner from Central and South Abaco, Roscoe Thompson, who were consistently there, trying to help the administrator, trying to help the police, and trying to help all. And I don't blame the administrators, the local government practitioners who were not there. They were home trying to care for their own families, right? And so they should not be placed in this invidious position where they're called upon with island administrators to look after such events. It is my considered view, however, that the preparation for hurricanes such as the seasonal tree trimming that happens by EPL should happen, the drain clearing by water and sewage, the readying of government facilities. You batten up all the government facilities and the hurricane shelters. These are necessary things that the administrator could manage along with the local government practitioners. But we need to change the model that we currently have, and I commend it to the government for its consideration. These individuals do their best in the face of tremendous challenges, but they too must get their homes and everything together. I believe, therefore, that it is time for us to consider putting in place as I said before, professionals. There's no question that we live in a climate change environment, which has made these events like Dorian more frequent and much more ferocious. Following Dorian, we received visits from the Secretary General of the UN, Secretary General to the OAS, and numerous heads of CARICOM states, as well as Secretary General of the Commonwealth. And as I said, I believe earlier today, on each occasion they said that it looked as if an atomic bomb had landed in Abaco after they toured all these sites. It is our fear that if the government, given its focus on raising awareness of detrimental impacts of climate change internationally, that things will only get worse. We commend on this side that the world must be told that we are the least offensive in black carbon emissions, yet we suffer the most from these extreme weather events, and we see now that they are upon us even more frequently. We've also come to the place where there is a dire need in our country for purpose-built hurricane shelters. And you know, all of these committees that are made up, that are all throughout this bill, I'm sure some of them are going to focus on these things. You know, I remember we were looking at a comprehensive plan in the Defense Force where you would go to each island, each community in the Commonwealth, and you would determine who had a heavy equipment, who had a D8, who had a tractor, who had a heavy truck, a big truck that could move people, who had boats that could move people, and you build a database. And so I call upon the committees to work very closely with the defense and police forces and with the island administrators, as it intends to do, I'm sure, to help with these kinds of modalities. We come to the place where we need purpose-built hurricane shelters. Gone are the days when you could take a community and say, go to the church, go to the school. One of the first places to go in Dorian was the school where people were. And in the eye of the storm, who could escape, escaped. And who couldn't, and one of the churches. Many of the churches just collapsed. So we need to build hurricane shelters of the type that we intended to build. I think the government is continuing with it in Central Abaco from the $1 million that we got from India to help with that resilient effort. We need to build them in places where we have high density populations. Exuma perhaps would be a nice place to put one. So you can encompass, you could take care of the Central Bahamas. Of course, New Providence need one, but I don't know, God forbid. God forbid if you see a Dorian in New Providence, if you see it heading this way, evacuate. Because you are surrounded by water, and Abaco, as long as it is, it's a skinny island. And so you had water that came from both sides of the island, north and south, right? The south was spared because the preponderance of Dorian, the heavy part of it, came from the northern side. And so we need community centers built for the purpose, hurricane shelters built for the purpose, and Minister, you could use them as we intended. You could use them for community centers as well. So they're not sitting there all year round and just waiting for a disaster, but the community can use them for community centers. Before I take my seat, I just want to share this. The Americans built for us some hurricane supply storages, right? I think there's one in Agua. I think there's one in Grand Bahama. And I know there's one at Coral Harbor. And we need to also build these. And the purpose of them was, or ask the Americans to help us to build some. They like to help us with those kind of things, right? The purpose of them was to have storage for water and food and cots and things that you may need before you could get help to you. And so the locals on the ground, until help arrived, would have some means of sustaining themselves in the wake of such an event. I commend the bill. We support this bill. And we think it is a step in a good, positive, right direction. And God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Darren Henfield, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Kirkland Russell.
Madam Speaker, Madam President, there's no doubt that there's no doubt that my good friend from Abaco would have inspired me to speak a little bit on this bill. Madam President, there's no doubt that God is good. Yeah, we are again speaking today on another bill that will positively impact the people of this great archipelago. And so, only God. And so, Madam President, I'll go right into my remarks. This bill we are debating is indeed a landmark bill. And the Honorable Miles LaRoda and his entire team and special consultant must be applauded for the outstanding work that was done to put this comprehensive package together. Madam President, this bill puts all the necessary agencies under one roof, creating an easily regulated and manageable process that establishes the proper platform for the effective management of the complete disaster cycle by all and sundry. That is to say, 1, the prevention. The committee will discover the best ways to address any potential disaster by proper planning, training, and being proactive. This means identifying potential hazards, vulnerabilities, and developing safeguards to mitigate their impact. Number 2, mitigation. Mitigation, in this case, aims to firstly minimize the loss of human life, then the loss of property, including both structural and non-structural infrastructure. Then preparedness. Preparedness is the ongoing process in which the government, private individuals, communities, businesses, and organizations can plan and train for what they will do in the event of a disaster. Preparedness is being able to put into practice your preparedness action plan. Then there's the response and reconstruction. Response and reconstruction is what happened after the disaster occurs. It involves both short and long-term responses. Ideally, the Disaster Management Committee will coordinate the use of resources to help restore personal and environmental safety, as well as minimize the risk of any additional loss of life and property. Then you will end with recovery and return to normalcy, which is the 5th stage of the disaster cycle. And at this stage, you will continue your reconstruction. And this can take long time, and sometimes for decades. When you look at our situation in Grand Bahama and Abaco, this process will surely not end right now. Madam President, and I want my colleague from Abaco to support me on this one. I want to strongly suggest that the Secretariat of the National Disaster Risk Management Committee be established and operate in Grand Bahama with a sub-office in Abaco. Let me tell you why I say that, Madam President. When you look at disasters, and particularly hurricanes and storms, from the time it's been recorded in 1900 to now, the number one and number two place that is either hit by a storm or at least threatened by a storm, a hurricane. Number one is Abaco. Number two is Grand Bahama. So I don't see why we can't, the Secretariat ought not be in those two islands. The Secretariat, the management. Madam President, I want to mention the Bahamas National Youth Guard. The program is being launched and will engage young people between the ages of 18 and 25 for a 3-month-long disaster management training. At the end of the training program, the successful participant will become a part of the National Disaster Youth Guard Reserve Team. These teams will be able to be mobilized at any given time during a disaster and carry out such functions as search and rescue, basic search and rescue, initial damage assessment, distribution, immediate response, communication, triage, and more. Let me mention and give some props to what we do down in Grand Bahama with the police department led by ACP Theophilus Cunningham. We have established disability chat groups, and we did that early in the summer. And during the threats of Ian, as well as Nicole, when Nicole passed, what we were able to do through these chat groups was to reach out to persons living with disability, contact them, get their information, find out if they needed to be evacuated, set times and date for evacuation, organize proper disability-friendly transportation to move those particular individual. And there were, a whole list of successful situations that happened as a result of that program. And so it's just a pleasure working with the police department and the community policing department. Down there it is led by ACP, woman assistant superintendent of police, Nicola Says, and her team, and they do a fantastic job with assistant. I know the same occurred in the Abacos with I can't remember the assistant superintendent. She also is a woman police officer, and they did a fantastic job. I think it is Bar. It is Bar, and they did a fantastic job in arranging similar activities. This bill also actually strengthens local government. It provides the kind of framework to strengthen local government as it relates to funding, as it relates to understanding their role, and the good senator would have shared some of those things that are important for local government. This thing must go on stage. We understand that all responses to a disaster must begin with a local response. However, we must understand and know when those responses are overwhelmed. And sometimes even before the incident occurs, we should have mobilized the necessary personnel, um, supplies. There may be need for evacuation of islands. Dorian have taught us that, you know, I don't know the exact percentage in Abaco, but in Grand Bahama, 70+% of the island was underwater. And so, and you're talking about two of the larger islands in the archipelago. And so when you look at a potential Dorian coming into a smaller island or more southern islands where you have, where your capacity, airport, harbor capacity will change even more drastically, we have to look at how we take action to ensure that those persons are secured. I want to also, in the other place, Dr. Michael Davel, the Minister of Health, would have talked about the breaking ground of the new hospital in Nassau. Well, I flew from Grand Bahama this morning, so I can talk about Grand Bahama a little bit, Madam President. I know that the properties and funding has been announced and secured for the hospital in Grand Bahama. Plans are still on the way, but I do expect that the groundbreaking exercise, if not simultaneously, there will not be a wide gap as to when we do the groundbreaking for the hospital in Grand Bahama. Let me say this, whilst we're talking about disasters and hospital for Grand Bahama. When we're thinking about hospital, we must consider the fact that Grand Bahama is the most industrialized island in the Bahamas and one of the most for its size in the region. When you talk about the oil refinery and oil storage facilities, all the various pharmaceutical plants, and all of those various chemical plants that are in those areas, those are all highly and major potential hazards that can cause, where you can see serious disasters coming from that could indeed cripple that particular island. And so the hospital is of paramount concern for the island of Grand Bahama. And it's important for Abaco too. Also, whilst we're talking about climate change and hurricanes, I want to give the Prime Minister some props, because this thing is going to cost money, man. Managing disasters, and finding money when you're talking about the complete disaster cycle, it is expensive. And so a few weeks ago, we would have debated the carbon credit bill. There is no doubt the Prime Minister is on to something special. I believe that we will see returns financially from our carbon credits. And my understanding is that the government is planning, well, the minister is here, but I don't want to ask him to speak to it, right? To talk about moving our carbon credit programs even on the stock markets. And so, because we anticipate this to be a robust exercise. And so, once again, the Prime Minister is on the right track. Madam President, since the topic of persons living with disability concerns came up during several of the debate, I will use the rest of my time, a little bit of this time, to brief you and to brief us on the recently launched Accessibility Bahamas. I WhatsApped the app to everyone whose phone I had. Let me just tell you a little bit about this app, because we were talking about ensuring that within this bill that we are able to communicate with persons living with disability. Well, one, This bill allows for the registration of persons living with disability, which will provide the government with empirical data. This data is critical, will be critical if we are going to adequately educate persons living with disabilities about their rights, entitlements, job opportunities, benefit, and other items that are important to their daily life. This bill, this app that I sent you, also which was created by the Persons Living with Disability Commission. Part of the app, they partnered with NAD to launch the Sunflower Program, which means all airport employees will be trained to recognize the special sunflower lineage tag that they will wear, and the persons living with disability will be automatically offered assistance by all employees at the airport. And so that's a wonderful move in the right direction. This app also levels the playing field as it relates to communication. We talked a lot about communication. So NEMA is a part of the app. And so as the persons register, NEMA will have the information of these individuals, and so the disaster committee, the risk management committee would have access to these individual information, and so as it relates to evacuation, response, as it relates to distribution, whatever the situation is pertaining to risk management, this app will assist those individuals with living with disability. This app will also provide accurate trending news, removing all threats of fake news. Alert systems will be applied through these apps, catering to the deaf, the blind, whoever within these, who is a part of the app. And let me just say this before I complete it. All of us could use the app. The app is user-friendly to anyone, but it is particularly designed for persons living with disability. The app will allow persons living with disability commission to assist persons living with disability with all government services. The app is a one-touch button app that allows persons living with disability to easily access emergency services such as police, ambulance, fire department, etc. The app also allows persons living with disability to make complaints about abuse, parking violations and infractions, and other infractions committed by the general public, as well as discrimination of all kinds. The app also creates the platform for deaf services. So what does this mean? Deaf persons can now get assistance through the app with job interviews, court services, and all forms of counter services. So if a deaf person goes to a hotel and there is no person there to sign, they log on to the app, and the app and a assigned person who can sign is there, and they will be able to check into their hotel, order food from their menu, and just access normal services that me and you take for granted. And finally, the app creates a platform for disability transportation. This program will go live by mid-year 2023 and will allow persons living with disability to access disability-friendly public transportation. And the government will pay a percentage of the bill, thus reducing the cost that will be passed on to persons living with disability, allowing those persons to go to food stores, work, visit friends, go to the doctor, pay their bills, and simply enjoy normal accessibilities that we take for granted. And so I was also informed that Alive has partnered with the Commission to ensure that all of their phones moving forward will have the app automatically installed on it. And so it is a wonderful thing. And so I just thought I would share that information with us based on the points that were made by Senator Seymour as well as Senator Forbes as relates to persons living with disability. All in all, Madam President, I support the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Kirkland Russell, for your contribution. As many.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, very briefly, for the wrap-up, I just want to thank all senators for their contribution. Once again, I think it was a very, very substantial, substantive, meaning it's big, but I think the contributions were very well considered, very, very well done. In terms of, particularly, most senators mentioned the importance of having concern, and not only concern, but having the facilities to take care of the disabled, the elderly, those who speak a different language, might not be fluent with English, those who are hearing impaired, etc. The importance of doing that, the importance of communication as indicated by Senator Seymour, and the fact that this is a national priority disaster management, and not only storm, but other types of disaster that needs to be on the forefront of our consideration constantly, given the intensifying impacts of climate change. We also take the point from Senator Henfield, who is experienced in the military and as well Family Island, being a Family Island MP, about the importance of having the shelters and completing the shelters, and as well having storage facilities. And so there's unanimous agreement, Madam President. The points are taken. It is important for us to recognize that, it's need more than just the words on the paper, but be able to move quickly to implement to the fullest extent possible, so that we can get the maximum benefit of what is intended here, which is a national collaboration from the very highest levels to the highest levels in terms of the executive to the community level, and being able to have that type of involvement as we prepare and respond to disaster. So once again, thanks to all the senators, Madam President, for their presence. We know that at this time will begin to go their way as we engage in the festivities around the holidays. So really thank all senators for their presence and their stick-to-itiveness to last throughout today for us to get to be able to debate these two very, very important pieces of legislation before we get to the end of the year. And so having said that, Madam President, I move for second reading and committal for a bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework for the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Order that the bill be read for a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters.
For the second reading,
There are none, Madam President.
senators, order, please. Committee of the Whole.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do resolve itself into a committee of the whole with the Vice President in the chair.
Is there a seconder? It is moved and seconded that the Senate do now resolve itself into a committee as a whole with the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole. As many as in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried.
Committee of the Whole. Which one are you doing first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in respect for a bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework to the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected purposes, I move that the long title be agreed.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the short title be agreed.
There a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The short title is agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that clauses 2 through 84 be agreed.
It has been moved and seconded that clauses 2 through 84 be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The motion is carried. Clauses 2 through 84 of the bill are agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the first schedule, the second schedule, and the third schedule be agreed.
Is there a
Second.
seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the first schedule, the second schedule, and the third schedule of the bill be agreed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The motion is carried. Schedule 1, 2, and 3 of the bill are agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill be now agreed in its entirety.
Is there a
Second.
seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the bill in its entirety be agreed. As many are in favor say aye. Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, with respect to a bill for an act to repeal the Mental Health Act and to make provision for the promotion, protection, and enforcement of the rights of persons diagnosed with or exhibiting symptoms of mental illness, the care and treatment of such persons, the establishment of a mental health services board, the establishment of a mental health review tribunal, and for connected purposes, I move that the long title be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the long title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye. Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the short title be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The short title of the bill is agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that clauses 2 through 74 be agreed.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that clauses 2 through 74 of the bill be agreed. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The motion is carried. Clauses 2 through 74 of the bill are agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the bill be now agreed in its entirety.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill be agreed in its entirety. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. The motion is agreed. The bill is agreed in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the President do now take the chair.
It has been moved and seconded that the President do now take the chair. As many are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those are opposed say nay. The motion is agreed. The motion is carried. Madam President will now take the chair. Madam President, I beg leave to report that the Committee of the Whole has examined both bills, having made no amendments thereto.
Honorable members, the Vice President and Chairman of the Committee of the Whole has reported that the committee has examined the bills, having made no amendments thereto. Third reading and passing of bills.
Madam President, I move that a bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected purposes be read a third time and passed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. As many as in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The motion is carried. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to provide for a more effective and comprehensive disaster risk management policy and framework through the establishment of the Disaster Risk Management Authority and for connected matters.
Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Disaster Risk Management Act 2022. For the third reading of bills.
Yes, Madam President. Madam President, I move that a bill for an act to repeal the Mental Health Act and to make provision for the promotion, protection, and enforcement of the rights of persons diagnosed with or exhibiting symptoms of mental illness, the care and treatment of such persons, the establishment of a mental health services board, the establishment of a mental health review tribunal, and for connected purposes be read a third time and passed.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. As many as are in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed.
A bill for an act to repeal the Mental Health Act and to make provision for the promotion, protection, and enforcement of the rights of persons diagnosed with or exhibiting symptoms of mental illness, the care and treatment of such persons, the establishment of a mental health services board, the establishment of a mental health review tribunal, and for connected purposes.
Order that this bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Mental Health Act 2022. For the third reading of bills.
There are none, Madam President.
Considerations of House amendments. Resolutions. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings.
Madam President, I would like to renew all notices standing in the name of the government.
Orders for clerk. Adjournment.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the Senate at its rising do adjourn sine die.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has moved and seconded that the Senate at its rising adjourn sine die. As many as in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Final adjournment.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
Second.
Is there a seconder? It is moved and second that the Senate do now adjourn. As many as in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried. The Senate stands adjourned sine die.